Thank you once again for joining us here on the Voice of Job Seekers. This is Mark, your host, and if you want to know more about the podcast and the blog, you can go to voiceofjobseekers.com where you can find out more information about the show. There are links there to iTunes and Stitcher if you want to subscribe, and hopefully you will after this particular interview. This is going to be a great conversation. I have on the line with me Gia Ganesh. Now, Gia Ganesh is she is a career strategist and coach. She has an MIS and an MBA. Her advice has been featured in Forbes Career Builder, Madame Noir, and Job Hero. I want to welcome to the show, Gia. How are you?
Good, thank you, Mark.
Good. I'm glad that you're able to join us. And I was actually around in your blog, and I came across an article that you wrote. And I kind of want to kind of take a piece off of that and talk about it because I have a lot of listeners who are women, a lot of women who are in the professional ranks and are always making adjustments, are always looking for a fresh perspective, and I try to deliver that. So I hope you don't mind talking about your article that you have on your blog. And if you
My pleasure, Mark.
sure. And if you want to go to Gia's blog, it's at GIAGANESH.com. And I'll also put a link directly to the article that we're talking about, is the must-haves that women should have for the career. And I don't know, you probably written this a little while ago, but was there a specific need that you were trying to meet with this particular article?
I think it was due to my coaching clients. I have quite a few women coaching clients as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to notice the same kind of issues resurface in my conversations with them. Most of my clients came to me with the same aspirations, but also the same factors that were holding them back. And I just wanted to write a blog post and share it so I could reach a lot more women who were struggling with the same kind of issues. And possibly there were others who did not know what really they needed to work on to move up in their career. So I'm really passionate about career advancement, Mark, especially with women. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I have worked in the corporate world as well, and I know what it takes to move up the ranks, if you will,
Right.
as well as succeed, even if you not necessarily do not want to move up the ranks, but if you just want to succeed at whatever job you are in,
Mm-hmm.
I believe these are some top must-haves.
Okay. Now, both men and women get emotional at work. And I too have been in the world, in especially on both sides of being an employee and being a manager. Men cry too. What are your differences from your view, in the way that men and women handle emotion when it comes to just perhaps their career trajectory?
It's interesting you bring up the men piece of the conversation because when I posted this article, I believe on LinkedIn, I think it was a man who responded first and said that, these are applicable to men as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote back to him and said, yes, absolutely. All these factors that I mentioned here are applicable to both men and women. But coming back to what you just asked me about in terms of display of emotions and how men and women handle emotions at work, I've had an interesting experience, Mark. I've worked at a relatively smaller sized company
Mm-hmm.
earlier on in my career, and I have seen men really display their emotions. I believe I mentioned that in my blog post as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've sat in boardroom meetings where men have used foul language as a display of emotion. I've seen men slamming doors after this outburst. So I've seen outbursts from men as well. But one thing that I definitely believe is more predominant is a quicker display of emotions from women than from men. I'm not stereotyping men or women here.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that, this is how it generally plays out. But most often from what I have seen, I've seen that it takes men a little longer to react. But when they do react, it's probably a little bit more forceful than women. It takes very little to instigate a woman or to prod a woman to display her emotions at work.
Mm-hmm.
And but the outburst is not as massive as when a man displays. Again, this is just from my personal experience. It may
Sure.
not play out
Sure.
like that
Yeah.
um, in other people's workplaces. But
Sure.
again, back to your question of how this matters in their career trajectory. I think our display of emotion is fine. We all are human, and that's what I want to remind listeners is we all are human and we bring our whole selves to work. We can't just cut off our personal life and say, I will not think about my personal life at work. Yes, we definitely don't want to sit and think about our personal life 8 hours while we're at work, but it's not possible to cut off our personal life when we get into work. So I always say that we bring our whole selves to work and we want to acknowledge that as we start our work. So if there are some drastic issues that are going on in your personal life, it is going to be very difficult to completely cut off
Mm-hmm.
and do your work. I'm not saying it's not possible, yes, but there is going to be a 10 or 20% lingering effect at work, and that may affect how we perform at work as well. And it doesn't matter if it's for men or women. I've seen men going through divorces and how that affects their work performance and how they show up at the work, So irrespective of who we are humans with the same kind of emotions, and it does matter how we bring them into work, how we manage them, and how we regulate them.
Yeah, I think lately I've seen more of being that even though it's not as intensely as emotional as when we had the recession and when we had the job market crash and we had all these very traumatic emotional experiences during those years where people were losing jobs. People are still kind of carrying around a little bit more emotion during their job search. Um, I've noticed lately that when people go to job interviews, they feel it's much more pressurized. And I think a lot of it's because the implementation for a lot of companies, they're interviewing with panels and they're kind of demanding more detail than what they're used to because in the past it just wasn't that kind of scrutiny. Now you're being much more scrutinized during that particular time. Do you find that the same way?
Yes, I believe the way we recruit and hire people has changed over the years. Whereas in the past, a simple phone interview followed by one in person interview was sufficient for, you know, early to mid career level positions.
Mm-hmm.
And only the higher level positions had multiple rounds of interviews and, from group discussions to panel discussions and um, lunch interviews and things of that nature used to be more for the higher ranking positions, but I've seen that it has trickled down to even definitely to the mid career positions and even to some of the early career positions depending on the role. So the way people present themselves, the way they show up is very important again. And this all goes back to preparation. Mark, gone are the days where we could just apply for a job, get a call from the interviewer, and go prepare for a standard list of questions and just show up and, deliver the answers that we prepared. And you got the job. It's not easy. It's not that easy anymore. There's a lot more factors that go into it,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the job interview phase, like things like personal branding and your presence, like it's called executive presence, and it's not just applicable to executives anymore, right? It's something that people are looking for at all levels. There are a lot more things that people are scrutinized for nowadays
Yeah.
than just those 5 or 10 questions that used to be the norm, right?
Right, right. And what people are beginning to realize is that when the old advice used to be, if you want a full time job, you had to look full time. Well, that's when you used to be able to walk up and down the building pretty freely without security, or that you're able to go and look through the papers and spend the bulk of your time analyzing every single job. And even though part of that is true, you have to look and make other different considerations. And I think one of the things that people need to consider is how their values and how their values match against the job that they're going to take. And sometimes that comes into having to make some more emotional decisions, and depending upon how your makeup is as a person, as an individual, and I'm not talking about men or women at this particular point, but emotionally, if you're attached to a situation where you're not going to be able to handle it emotionally, it's not a bad idea to say no to that job.
That's right, Mark. Um, Again, this is something that I ask my clients. I, in fact, challenge my clients to map out what they truly want from their career, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we are living in a world anymore where we just want to earn money for the sake of paying our bills. There's a lot more that goes into our careers.
Yes.
We are all looking for fulfillment from our careers. Most people who feel stagnated, frustrated, disengaged with their work, one of the primary reasons is because it doesn't match with their values, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't match with what they want from their careers in terms of maybe growth, in terms of meaning, in terms of financial security, in terms of well-being. It could be a various number of factors. But yes, values, mission, purpose, all those are highly relevant nowadays. Especially, I'm noticing this trend with mid-career professionals quite
Mm-hmm.
heavily rather
Yes.
than early professionals. But it is a big trend that I am definitely seeing for sure.
Yeah, and in your article you mentioned, and I think this ties in a little bit, is to I think in this particular case you were wanting to encourage women to speak up much more, to be much more actively engaged in their expression.
Mhm.
And you can let me know if I'm off track here, but I think what it is we don't we're afraid to speak up because we don't want to blow the opportunities, or we don't want to be seen negatively. But actually these days I think it's a much more positive attribute to have, for you to be a little bold and to be able to speak up when you see something that isn't right, or something that's missing, or whatever the case
That's
may be.
that's true, Mark. That's true. So yes, you're right in that the fact that people are afraid to express themselves and speak up because they're scared of the possible repercussions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people think that they are viewed negatively. Some people believe that they may alienate other people with their opinions because they bring a different viewpoint to the
Right.
table,
Mm-hmm.
right? And nobody wants to feel alienated. We all live in a world where we want to be super social all the time. So that's definitely possible reasons for why people don't speak up. The What I do definitely urge, and you're again right, I forgot that you mentioned this, is the fact that definitely speaking up and being able to express our opinions is a differentiating factor for us. The world wants to know that you have something to bring to the table. And it's not just from the way you perform your work or the work that you do. So, if you are, for example, I'll give you a classic example,
Mm-hmm.
which is, we live in a technology world and there's tons of developers and people in the actual development, the coding arena, right?
Right.
And it's not just enough for these developers to just go and code whatever they need to code and come back. They also need to be able to express their opinions on how the application is being developed, for example. They need to be able to stand up and say, this is not the right technology to use, if that's the case. They need to be able to say, I believe I have a better way to do this, even though they are speaking to probably somebody three ranks above them. That's another thing. We don't want to let somebody else's rank or seniority or experience affect our opinions and our strengths. I mean, what we bring to the table. We want to be able to confidently put it forth. And this is something I believe I wrote in another article, which I can't remember which one, is I want people to think about what is the worst that could happen. And again, when you express your opinions, you don't have to do it in a forceful way. You can be respectful at all times when you express your opinion
Yes.
and speak up, right? You
Hmm.
want to speak up, but do it respectfully. Just make sure that what you are bringing forth is in the best interest of everybody, you, the person in front of you, as well as the organization that you work for. As long as you are able to checklist against these three items, is this in my best interest, is this in the listener's best interest, and is this in the best interest of this organization or team, you are fine. And if you can express your opinions in a respectful way, you are golden. But where people begin to shut down or retract is when they feel like, oh, I'm talking to the director, I'm talking to the VP. I'm sure this person knows much more than me. I'm sure this person has seen thousands of these projects, and that if he hasn't implemented this idea before, it definitely doesn't merit me bringing
Not
this up now.
always. They don't
Right.
always know the most at all.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think you speak to something that's really important when people need to, when they're in contact with a potential employer, the goal is to have conversations. It's not to the expectation of being interrogated, and to be
Yes.
asked. You've got, and sometimes to you may not have to frame it as being disagreeable. Just say, well, I found another solution, or I see it from this perspective, or I'll add to a lot of times the delivery of your different perspective is makes all the difference in the world. Instead of saying that you're disagreeing, that might be a trigger for someone, as opposed to
Exactly.
if you have a different perspective, or just saying it differently in a way that will foster additional conversation, which is exchanging ideas, and not particularly you tell me what you want to do and I'll do it like a robot. I don't think that's what most people or the good employers really want anymore.
Right. And you're right in mentioning that delivery is important and framing of the delivery. And what I mean by that is if you're able to present in your thoughts in a way that brings out what is in it for the other person or the team,
Hmm.
what value that your opinion is going to add to the team, it makes it easier, right?
Hmm.
That's one thing. And second thing is not being attached to the outcome, right?
Right.
If you're able to bring forth your opinion without being attached to the outcome, meaning you express what you want to express in a mindful and respectful way.
Hmm.
You are able to share what value you bring, what value your idea brings to the team, but you are not attached to the outcome, meaning even though there is a chance this idea may not be implemented, you are okay with it. You're not like, oh my God, they did not take my idea, they did not implement my idea.
Right.
If you're not attached to the outcome, it makes it much more easier to speak up the next time. If you start getting attached to the outcome, that's when you feel like, oh, they never listen to what I have to say. They never implement my ideas. If you start getting into that negative spiral, you're just going downward from there. You're never going to be able to speak up after that because you start having this self limiting belief that nobody values what I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that people who have often will have ideas will just think that they'll pop out like a baby, instead of instead of providing a trail, an investigative trail of information that is obvious. When the idea it comes to fruition, it's all yours because you laid all of the groundwork before. And you could do that even during interviews and your job search. If you have an online presence, you can definitely lay that groundwork pretty easy to where there's no question at all that who has the proprietorship of the ideas. And I think people tend to passively and without thinking that every idea that they have has to have some kind of intellectual trademark. You may not go through the actual process, but you do have a chance to lay the branding in a way that trademarks your idea because of the way you brand yourself.
Right, right. Absolutely.
Well, this was a great discussion, and I do thank you very much. And I told you I would put a restraint of time on it, even though I can go on forever. And
Um,
go ahead.
Mark, may I
Yes.
share one quick thing with your listeners?
Sure. Sure. Go ahead.
Simply because you started the conversation about women, right? And how
Yes, I did.
I just remember something as we were speaking. And I really think I want to share this message to all the women who are listening to this show.
Hmm.
And it's just going to take a couple minutes. So, I am hosting a career advancement summit. I'm not sure when this thing is going live, but I'll be hosting a career advancement summit. It'll be going live September 12th through the 16th. And as one of the speakers on the summit is Marshall Goldsmith
Hmm.
of Triggers and you want What Got You Here Won't Get Me There, the author of
Okay.
best-selling books. And I was interviewing him, and this is what he had to share, and that's what I want to share with the women listeners on the show today. Is he is the world's number one executive coach, and in all his coaching, he feels that women, or he's seen in his experience, he's seen that women are most hard on themselves, and
Hmm.
especially in the workplaces and even at home. But in the workplaces, women are the most hard on themselves, and they are the ones who are striving and suffering from the perfectionist syndrome
Hmm.
as opposed to men. And he was telling me how this is definitely something that holds us back or pulls us down in our careers. This way we strive for perfectionism in everything we do, as well as
Hmm.
being very hard on ourselves. It goes hand in hand, of course, because you're striving for perfectionism all the time. Even a slight deviation from that, you tend to be really hard on yourself. So he said that if we can work on these two things that hold us back, we can definitely make progress by leaps and bounds. So that's something I want to leave your listeners with, is to stop being too hard on yourself. Learn
Hmm.
to relax what your expectations are, as well as stop striving to be perfect in everything you do. So, I definitely want to pass on this message from Marshall to your listeners. And if people are interested, then the Career Advancement Summit goes live September 12th through the 16th, I believe. And the link is careeradvancementsummit.com for
Okay.
anybody who's interested.
Okay. Well, you don't get off that easy just by sharing and not answering a question or two about that.
Oh, yes,
Because,
let's go for it.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Well, the perfectionism is something that I've seen with women, and I think it manifests itself in several different ways. But I think some of it too, and you could tell me if it's right or wrong, is that the expectations of women have been unfairly, um, you know, put upon perfection. Not just what they expect of themselves, but what they get from other men many times, many times. Sometimes in the past from home and from work, but sometimes it's even in competition with other women. Um, do you think that as we're beginning to become much more aware of how empowered women actually are, that they don't have to put that kind of pressure on themselves?
Yes, I believe that's what we are driving. I mean, that's what Marshall's message was all about, was we really need to relax our expectations and be able to have faith in the fact that our work, even though it's not perfect in our own eyes,
Mm-hmm.
still adds value the way it is supposed to.
Yes.
And you did mention something about how, men and the way we are brought up influences women's perfectionist syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
I I am not sure if, like, in my personal belief, I think it's an innate quality that most women seem to have, because when I talk to women, irrespective of culture, background, position, irrespective of whether they are working professionals or they are homemakers, irrespective of anything, I'm noticing that women seem to have this innate quality in themselves. And I could be completely wrong. I'm not a psychologist by any means here, but that's just from my personal observation that all women seem to have that, even at work, or the way they raise their kids, or the way they present the food. Like, you'll notice this tendency in every aspect of their life. You can
Mm-hmm.
do that with the women in your life, Mark. You can see when next time you're out with a woman friend, just see if you can see these perfectionism syndromes in them. It seems to appear in every aspect of their life, and the problem is they have high expectations in their head. Women seem to have really high standards for themselves more
Yeah.
than anybody else. And that's what drives this perfectionism syndrome for them. So, if we can believe that even though what we do is not to the A level in our own heads, it still adds value. If the fact that you're able to, give you a simple example. The
Go
fact that
ahead.
you're able to put food on the table from for your family
Mm-hmm.
every single day, irrespective of how it is presented, irrespective of whether it's a perfectly balanced meal every single time. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that you're able to cook every day and put the meal on your table is an amazing job. Instead of getting your family to eat outside every day, the fact that you're able to give home cooked meals is a big deal. So stop being so hard on yourself for not presenting the perfect balanced meal every single time. This is a very simple example. Let's take it to the workplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though we are not able to, let's say we are building a report, we are preparing a report for our boss, even though our report does not have all the fancy features that we would like it to have, if it has the data that our boss is looking for, if it has the content that is going to add value to our boss's meeting, that's okay. That's enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. So we need to stop striving to be perfect at all times.
Yes. And, there's a study that actually supports a lot of what you said, and perhaps we might even be thinking of the same study. I was going to say that it was pay scale. Maybe it wasn't, but um, it shows where men, when they see an example, men, when they see a job description, if they fit, they're more likely to apply for that job
Oh, yes.
if they're 60 to 75% a fit as far as the job description is concerned. Women feel like they need 90 to 100% a fit in order for them to apply to that job. So, to what you're saying, that is a critical part of understanding how the perfectionism plays a big part in all facets, not even just our family.
That's totally right. I know exactly what study you're talking about, and it's funny that I can relate to it because I have been through those same phases early on in my career, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
I have looked at job positions, and this happens with my clients too. When we are trying to look for jobs and we're trying to identify good jobs to apply for, I have seen so many of my clients. They're like, you know what? I don't satisfy these requirements. I cannot apply to this job. And you're perfectly right in the fact that a man in the same position would feel confident enough to apply versus a woman
Mm-hmm.
who possibly has 75% of the requirements and still does not have the confidence in applying. And they forget what is the worst that can happen is that you still receive the no, but at least you tried and you have a 50% chance of getting an interview after applying.
Yeah, yeah. I think some of it's also shaped by the job market, because I think in the past men have gotten a pass for being a certain percentage competent as opposed to women. There's much more pressure. If it's not particularly from the employer, it's the fact that society expects you to be much more perfect for the job. Even when women talk amongst themselves, I mean, I've listened to plenty of conversations with my wife who are friends with other professionals. And mind you, I've been married for some decades now. So I've seen, perhaps hundreds of these conversations with them to where they would have this exchange. And the exchange was, well, you can't go for that because you don't have, it's sort of a nitpick thing. And I don't know. I think some of it's driven again by men who kind of expect that unrealistically without really expecting that out of themselves. But I think as well is that sometimes, that just takes some boldness in saying, well, 60%, maybe that one particular characteristic that you have that might be your superpower outweighs everything else that's on the description. Not to mention that job descriptions are also badly written, but that's besides the point. But I think a lot of times we just don't know how much weight is given to that one or two superpowers that you may have. That where if you apply, they say, well, we need this more, we need all these other 15 other things.
Right.
So, yeah, it would be time to take that step and go ahead and, like you said, no doesn't mean a final failure. You don't ever get a chance to apply again. It's good to even find out, what you need by getting a no, and be able to go back and
Exactly
apply
right, Mark.
something
That's so true.
similar. Yeah. So there's always but you've got to be willing to go through that part. You got to be resilient to be able to face that part.
Right.
So I think that was a great exchange. Thank you for answering that question. I think that, there's more to come on that subject in the future. But in any case, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to exchange dialogue with you, or if they want to know more about you and your services, how can they get in contact with you?
I think the best way to get in contact with me is through my website, giaganesh.com, or you can email me, gia@giaganesh.com, or please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a dialogue there as well. Again, look for me, Gia Ganesh, and you'll be able to find me.
Great. And I'll have the link in the show notes so people can go directly from there if they'd like.
Okay.
In the meantime, thank you so much for being the voice of job seekers. And to the rest of you, thank you for joining us for this conversation this week. We'll be back next week with another great conversation, hopefully to aid your job search and help your career. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.